Governor John Bel Edwards, kind enough to join us this morning. Governor John Bel, how are you today?
Robert, I am doing wonderful. How about yourself?
What's your favorite movie of all time? Not that we plan to ask you that, but we were just talking about Cool Hand Luke, and so many people love that classic.
Well, actually, that is one of my favorites, but I have really kind of switched over to "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou."
Isn't that awesome? The Coen brothers. That is.
I love the music and anyway, I've watched it way more times than I should have.
Well, I don't mean to be jumping the gun or stepping over the line here, but I find it no small irony that the governor would his two favorites would be prison movies. I'm just fascinated by that. Probably just a coincidence. Okay, tell us about Cuba.
Well, Cuba. Well, first of all, it was a great trip, and the people down there could not have been more gracious. They were wonderful. Of course, they're trapped in a system that just is failing them. And that's really what they wanted to talk to us about, and it's why we have so many opportunities. Robert, before the 1959, Louisiana was by far the leading port doing business with Cuba, with agricultural products and so forth. And so we want to be in a position to resume that relationship when more trade becomes possible.
Pardon me, imports, exports, both?
Both. But, if ultimately, if they don't have more money in Cuba, they can't buy much. So they're going to have to sell some things too. And of course, it'll get off to a very slow start because it isn't like they just have all these manufacturers down there pumping out products and they're not producing a whole lot of agricultural products either. But they're going to have some money in order to buy things with. But their per capita rice consumption on an annual basis is about 144 pounds. And now that's like 4 times what we eat here in Louisiana.
But they don't have much money, though. So how are they going to pay us?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They don't. And that's one of the problems, Aaron, is right now, under the embargo, they have to pay in full at the time of delivery. They don't allow banks to finance these transactions, which means they're just not possible. And so one of the things that when it happens will free up this going forward is they would allow banks to finance the transactions, and then the banks would work out the payment arrangements with Cuba, and it would be slow to start with.
So in your mind, pardon me, the lessening of the embargo rules, the restrictions is to your way of thinking, good for everybody.
Well, I think we're headed in that direction. If you just look, I'm not trying to involve myself in national politics, but if you just look at what's happened over the last several years, the way public opinion is changing in the United States, but particularly among the second and third generation Cuban Americans, you can see us moving in this direction. And so I think it behooves us to establish the communications, the relationships necessary to take full advantage and have 60% of the grain that is exported from the United States comes out of the ports of South Louisiana. We just need to be there, need to make sure that we can resume that historical relationship. We would be much better off for it, and by the way, the Cuban people too. And I'm convinced that once we start robust trade and exchanges and so forth, they will quickly move towards a much more capitalistic system.
Let's shift to University Health BRF. The deal has been done. It looks like everybody signed it. Is this the best we can do for our community and for the state?
Well, it's certainly the best we can do for now, and we're always going to be looking for ways to improve. Eventually, the entire cooperative endeavor agreement with every partner hospital is going to be reworked. But this was a memorandum of understanding to adjust the existing CEA. I think it puts UH in a very stable position. And by the way, the relationship between UH and the medical school now, I think, is much better because we're going to allow the medical school to receive fair market value for the services that are rendered by their residents at UH. But also, if UH doesn't have the volume of business necessary to fully train and educate their doctors, they then get to place their doctors with different providers around North Louisiana. But all of those providers will be paying fair market value for those residents, and this creates a revenue stream back to the medical school that makes it less reliant upon those one-time appropriations of general fund dollars, which are so scarce, as you all know. And it puts that operation in Shreveport in a much more similar fashion as to what we're doing in New Orleans, if you will.
You said every cooperative endeavor agreement will be reworked. How so? Yeah. What does Governor John Bel want in those agreements that's not there now?
Well, for example, one of the things that we need to do is the partnership agreements under the original CEAs. The state pays 80% of the annual amount we owe them in October. Well, the problem with that is our revenue typically comes in January, and so we don't want to be paying that much money in October, and so we're going to shift this payment schedule and get to where we're paying on a monthly or a quarterly basis. There's no reason why we would need to have to come up with that amount of money all at one time. And so I mean that's one of the things we're talking about. When we rework the CEAs, we're going to have a better idea of what the Medicaid expansion has meant to the bottom lines of all these hospitals and what savings were actually generated as opposed to those that we anticipated, and we will be in a position to make adjustments to fully reflect those savings in order to make sure we're not overpaying our partners. And in fact, getting back to the first point, I believe it's going to be a monthly payment to all of our partners starting next year. So there's a lot that we need to work on. Healthcare is a very complex business. Healthcare, when it comes to accounting and financing, is extremely complex, and the landscape is always changing. And so you always have to be looking forward, working with our partners at CMS to make sure that we don't run afoul of any of their requirements either.
Mr. John Bel, you had said that the deal between the state and biomedical research was the best we could do for now. Is it your hope? Is it the hope of the people in Baton Rouge that the relationship with biomedical research can be long-term?
Yes. And when I say for now, I didn't mean that I'm not satisfied with it. I just meant that we are going to be reworking the CEAs with all of our partner hospitals. But I believe that we are in a position where the hospital itself is going to be much more stable. The medical school will as well. And quite frankly, I have to make sure, and I'm going to insist, that all of the players in both of those entities get along a little better, to be honest with you. And so we're going to be meeting with them because there's no reason for every time there's a difference for it to show up in the newspapers. That does nothing to inspire confidence in the community in Northwest Louisiana. And it shouldn't be necessary, especially now that we have reworked an agreement that is fully satisfactory to LSU and to BRF, both of whom have good, competent people at the helm. We just need to make this work, and we're going to do it. I'm very optimistic.
Let me, real quick, I know you got to go. The med school in Shreveport is safe, is secure, and here for the future.
Yes, and that has been my position all along. And anybody who's ever said that they thought the medical school was going to be moved out of Shreveport and relocated somewhere in South Louisiana, I have no idea where they got that. It wasn't from any source related to LSU or to the governor's office. And conspiracy theories abound around Louisiana, and that one took hold in Northwest Louisiana, but there was never any real support for that anywhere. And I have always maintained that the medical school in Shreveport is going to stay in Shreveport, but we are going to strengthen it. We're going to revitalize it and make sure it's there for decades to come.
Thank you so much, Governor. We appreciate your time.
Robert and Aaron, thank you all very much, and your listeners.